It is recording. So, last week, here's the thing. It was good. Last week was great, but we went through 3 chapters in an hour. That's way faster than what we normally do. So we'll slow it down tonight. I figure we're probably going to make it through 2 chapters tonight, maybe. So depending on how much questions we've got, we are ready for Genesis chapter 37. That's where we're starting in. And this gets into another one of those very familiar stories. So it's interesting. I want to tell you about a friend of mine. His name is Daniel Freemeyer. Daniel entered the ministry process and then stepped away from it. He's now an adjunct professor at Indiana Wesleyan. He teaches undergrad and seminary classes. And Daniel has a business, he calls it, he's a Bible coach. And I meet with Daniel every week. He's who helps me do a lot of the research that I do for my sermons. That's part of the reason why most of you know this. I preach the way I preach, and the way I can do it is because I'm usually thinking about a sermon for about 6 months. So we've got the skeleton of the sermons right now, at least through the middle of June done. We have topics. I've got my topics all the way through next July, basically ready. And so he's doing the research. He loves digging into the cultural stuff. So he found out that I was doing this. And so he has made part of our time. He just wants to give me some of the pieces he knows about what we're studying. And so that's where I found out about, the household gods piece and some of those pieces that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And so I just want to give you that little piece. Daniel will actually be here preaching on Sunday morning for me, March the 20th. And I hate the fact that I won't be here for it, but I'm really excited that he gets of that caliber coming to, who knows he's been helping me write the sermons and do all that. And so that's just a tidbit of why I think it's neat and where I'm getting some of this. Because normally what I like to do is I just want the Holy Spirit to lead us. I want to see what the Holy Spirit brings up and where we go from there. So some of this, what I've learned tonight, was really neat. And so that's why I'm excited about it. And that's where some of the stuff comes from. And so if you have even the really hard questions, don't hesitate, because I think Daniel finds it neat that we've got so many people really engaged in Scripture. So with that, we are in Genesis chapter 37. And I'm going to read verses 1 through 4, even though it's technically 2 paragraphs in my Bible, just because verse 2 kind of goes between 2 paragraphs. So with that, Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 4 says, Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is a story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them of their father. Bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was a son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him.
No robe of many colors.
There is multiple ways you can translate that. The biggest thing here is, and I want to start on this side. So if you remember when we kind of had the whole family here, and I've been debating about erasing this, but the reality is we need it for at least 1 more week. And I made a simple change to the chart because on this column we have Leah's kids, and then Zilpah, which was Leah's maidservant, right? So this is Leah's children by Jacob. Even though Zilpah is the mother of some of them, they still count on Leah's side. Over here you have Rachel with Joseph and Benjamin, and then Bilhah and her 2, Dan and Naphtali. And I've moved them down here because what I learned is, culturally speaking, we've always said the oldest firstborn son is the one who inherits everything, correct?
Yes.
But that's only if there's one wife. It's the firstborn son of the favored wife who is considered the one who inherits everything.
That changes everything.
That changes everything, doesn't it? So in theory, it should be Dan, because Dan is the oldest on Rachel's side, right? But Dan isn't a child of Rachel. And so when Joseph is born, he is the first son of Rachel. And so this coat is given to him not just to say we love him, but really to show the rest of the brothers he is to be the head of the clan when Jacob dies.
But how true that turned out to be.
Now, it does turn out to be true, but what normally happens to the head of the clan? What does he get? He gets 90% of everything that belongs to his father. Now, could you imagine Reuben, the oldest son, for all his life until Joseph is born, is under the impression that he is the one to inherit everything? Because that's the way the rules go. When Dan and Naphtali are finally born, it still doesn't change Reuben's status.
But doesn't the one who inherits things takes care of the rest of the?
Absolutely, but he becomes the head of the clan too, which means everybody else is subject to him. And so for all of Reuben's life, he believed that he was supposed to be that person. He's probably the one who's working with Dad, figuring out how to do all the negotiating and contracts. He probably went with Jacob when there was deals to be made and they're talking about pasture land and using the wells and anything that happens, Reuben would have went along.
Well, Reuben's probably 25 years older than Joseph.
And Reuben is probably as much as 25 years older than Joseph. And so whenever Jacob makes a declaration when Joseph turns 17, that now he gets this coat, he is to be, this is the sign that he's going to take over everything. How do you think this went over with the rest of the brothers?
Like a lead balloon.
Like a lead balloon. This isn't just that Joseph is the favored son. This is much bigger than that.
Well, does this mean that Joseph came back and told his brothers? Mine says,
Told on them.
So not only does Joseph get this favored status, but here it says in verse 2 that Joseph sees his brothers not necessarily doing the job the way Dad wants it done. And so Joseph is a snitch on top of it.
okay, I read it.
And so not only is Joseph the favorite son, not only is Joseph supposed to be receiving 90%, but now he's telling bad stories on his brothers, diminishing their status even more.
And this was after he got.
This is after he got the promotion and after he got the coat. He's continuing. It's clear this is a 17-year-old boy and hasn't really thought about how interpersonal dynamics work.
But you never answered my question. It doesn't say anything about many colors in there.
So right now, for mine, it mentions sleeves, but it says the traditional, that in the Hebrew, it talks about it being this brilliant coat. It's not just a vest. And it's got a coat with long sleeves, which would be really, that's extra. It's flamboyant. It's not something you'd normally see.
If it's in the desert, would that be a little bit ambitious? I mean.
And it's in the Greek translation, what's called the Septuagint, that it actually says it's a coat of many colors. So Hebrew just says it's a coat with long sleeves, something more majestic.
The New King James Version says he made a tunic of many colors.
And that's based on the tradition of what the Greek translation says that is, and probably it's not necessarily many colors, like we tend to think of it being like the rainbow. It's probably a tunic of bright colors. We're probably talking specifically purples, reds, and blues. Regal colors, royal colors. It's meant to make him stand out in the crowd so that when somebody's coming to this clan, they know exactly who to go to. Does that make sense?
What is the age 17? Is that an age that normally they announced?
By 17, typically you would already be engaged or be married and moving on towards taking your own spot as an adult.
As an adult.
So this is kind of a, you know, think it from our perspective in our culture, it'd be like a graduation gift. Like he's graduating high school and he's getting ready to go be whoever he's going to be. And so that's the age we're talking about here for them. Does that make sense? And so whether it's a coat of many colors, a coat with long sleeves, the point being made is this is meant to make Joseph stand out. It's a very clear delineation that Joseph is the prince. Joseph is the one who will be taking over the clan when Jacob can't do it anymore or he passes away. Yes.
Crystal says, bubble burst, I was picturing that the coat was of many colors, it's like a rainbow of colors, not just a certain colors.
And it could be, it really could be that, but more than likely it would be the colors that pinpoint him as being the important person.
So how accurate are depictions of biblical days where if they got a tunic, it was pretty bland colors?
Well, light blues would be fairly common. Some green colors would be fairly common because those are colors that you can make dyes out of fairly easily. But bright colors like reds and deep blues and purples were reserved because they were expensive. The materials you needed to make those dyes were expensive.
A little bit, the one with accepted colors.
And there is some of that too. But it wouldn't be uncommon to see probably yellows and oranges and greens and browns as common colors. But again, you're going to pay twice as much to get a dyed cloth as you would to just get a cloth. And so when you're talking about resources being scarce, and in particular, when you're talking about a shepherding culture, so they've got to be out with their animals, they probably don't want to take the time to dye the wool if they don't have to. So if they're making it themselves, if they're making their own textiles, dyeing is a luxury. It's not just a luxury from a financial standpoint, it's a luxury from a time standpoint. Because every moment that someone isn't out caring for the animals, someone else is doing more. Does that make sense? And so I think realistically, they probably had almost as many colors as we do today, but some of the more brilliant colors, some of the more colors that stand out, they would be reserved for certain classes of people or certain economic statuses just because they're the ones who could afford it.
Well, and some cultures today still carry on traditions of certain colors are reserved for certain ceremonies.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
The message, which of course is not quite the same type of translation, says that he made him an elaborately embroidered coat, which is totally different than a dyed coat.
So regardless of whether we're talking about something that's embroidered, which again would be even more time consuming than just a standard coat, whether we're talking about a finely colored coat, which again would be more expensive because of the dyeing and that whole process, or the way it's portrayed in every Sunday school lesson where you get this rainbow colored coat, all of them are pointing to a reality. Joseph isn't just the favorite son. Joseph is now the son. Yes.
Well, it's also like the articles both of them chose to make. This isn't something that is ceremonial either. It's something he's going to be wearing every day while he's also tending to the flock. So it's going to have
Outside, it's an outer garment.
It's an outer garment and it's an outer garment that is meant to be seen.
Yeah.
So are we starting to get a picture here? Is anybody rooting for the other brothers at this point?
I don't see how Joseph can think everything's gonna turn out all right. Is he kind of relying on Jacob to bail him out if he gets in too deep? Because he's digging himself a big hole.
And that's the point that the way this story is being told is trying to make. Jacob is sheltering Joseph. Jacob is giving Joseph everything he needs, and the other brothers are working hard for anything they've got.
But they're slacking off according to Joseph.
Well, are they really slacking off, or do you think it's just this bratty boy who just wants to make it a point to show that I'm supposed to be in charge, so I'm gonna make sure that they're doing it. So if there's anything out of line, anything at all, it's gonna get reported.
But they, on the other hand, may think, we're not gonna pay attention to snot-nosed kids because we've been doing this for years.
And because Dad has paid this big thing on Joseph, you almost get the impression, well, if he's going to do that for Joseph, then should we really be working that hard anymore? It's not our responsibility. We're just lowly members of this family. I'm just a nobody. I'm just going to do my part. Apparently, I'm not worth a whole lot. You can almost hear these things, can't you?
It kind of happens today a little bit. doesn't
It kind of happens today a little bit.
Yeah, there's still a little bit.
And I can almost picture, I mean, our kids are all young adults now, but when they were all in high school and junior high, whichever kid was the favored kid that week, the other three were just not happy about it. Am I wrong?
Did you routinely pick a favorite?
They thought that we favored Leah all the time.
Every week you pull a name out of the
Hey,
hat.
that would have been a lot smarter, you know, every week you pull a different name out of the hat. Oh, it's Grant's week to be the favored.
Okay, I would just say usually it's the baby, it should have been Madison, they both agreed she was
Yeah.
a brat, so.
So to that point, in our household, Melissa and I are both the oldest. We both watch the babies in our family get spoiled. And so actually Madison probably got the least amount of slack. In fact, I'll tell the story and then we'll get back to scripture. But she was probably about 4 years old and she went off to preschool and she came home and apparently one of her friends informed her that she's the baby. That's a card worth playing. That'll get you somewhere. So she asked us for something. And I don't even know what she asked for. You remember, Darren? And we're like, no, you're not doing that. And she goes, but I'm the baby. And both of us were like, no, in fact, just because you've thrown that card out, you're grounded. It's not happening. And of course, she never played that card. By the same token, I'm just going to say this right now, she's the most on her own. She takes care of herself. Maybe we did something right with that one. Okay, sorry. That was a little, yeah. So back to scripture, verse 5 through 8. Okay, so remember, we just had this happen. You know, Joseph's tattled on his brothers. He's gotten the coat. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered round it and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us? So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. Someone's not taught Joseph. There's just some things you keep to yourself.
Yeah.
What else do you notice?
He's only 17, he doesn't know too much. The other boys have been around the block for times.
Yeah.
They also believe in dreams.
Well, they do believe in dreams.
And interpreting. You talked about
and interpreting
they had to
dreams. That
interpret.
the reality is we've already had a number of dreams. Abraham had dreams, Isaac had dreams, Jacob's had dreams.
Jacob.
What is sheep?
What?
What is a sheep?
A sheave is a bunch of
Well, now-
leaves. A big
Go down to
bundle
the
of leaves.
Amish farm, you'll see it,
Yeah.
spring, they do their wheat.
So someone else,
I was just gonna say, you know, apparently he hasn't learned the pecking order yet. He hasn't got walked up by his brothers too.
apparently he,
And I had 3 older brothers, and I learned pretty quick, you just rat them out very often.
and, you know, I was the oldest, but I still had 3 younger brothers, and oftentimes they would gang up on me. So I learned really quick. You just don't be a snitch, you know? And even if you've got a card that makes you the trump, even if you know that this is going to get them, you gotta be real selective when you play that card. But apparently he thoroughly believes daddy's got his back. What else do you
Or
notice?
else
Any-
he's pretty dumb.
What?
Or else he's pretty dumb.
Or else he's just
I'm gonna say naive, young and naive.
Yeah.
young and naive, borderline ignorant. We'll go with ignorant, not dumb. He's just ignorant of how the world works, right?
At this point.
At this point,
Yeah.
he's gonna learn pretty quick, but
The whole trip to Egypt had to be hard.
we're not there yet.
I know.
Don't jump too far. Don't pull a Jim on us.
That's Jim's role.
That's Jim's role, right?
Well, he also says here that, and they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. So he
Yeah.
probably was very haughty.
He was a little full of himself, but I mean, let's be honest, what teenage guy isn't a little full of themselves? I mean, you know, it's almost, you have to be. It's gotta exert yourself in order to make sure that, you know, you get something out of life. He's going about it the wrong way, but you know. So do you think it gets any better? Of course, we know the story, so let's read the next paragraph. He had another dream. You think he would keep this one quiet after the way his brothers responded to the first one? And he told it to his brothers. Oh, wait, nope, didn't learn the lesson. Saying, look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me. But when he told it to his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him. Finally, Dad's speaking up, right? And said to him, what kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you? So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
Sounds like Mary.
Sounds a little bit like Mary. So on the one hand, Joseph finally crossed the line where Dad says enough is enough. But by the same token, Jacob's beginning to wonder. Some dreams are just, you know, bad mutton the night before. Some dreams mean something.
So my Bible mentions that when he says your mother and I, that he might be referring to Leah since Rachel had already passed.
That's an interesting point, because more than likely, he's not going to refer to, you know, Bilhah or Zilpah as mothers, even though at least at the beginning of this, he refers to them as wives. But still, Leah now becomes the primary wife because Rachel has passed. You ever, you know, when something happens, sometimes the first time you experience it, it doesn't mean a whole lot. The second time you experience it, it causes you to maybe pause a little bit. But if you've ever had something happen 3 times, all of a sudden you start thinking, wait a second, something's going on here. And we haven't had the third one, but we've gotten 2 dreams back to back that are essentially saying the same thing. Right? Which is why I think it says, and Jacob kept this matter in his mind. I think it really is meaning that same phrase, how in the Gospels, Mary treasured these things in her heart, is what it says of her. That maybe God is giving him something. Now, by the same token, no one wants this bratty Joseph to really be the one in charge, but there might be something here.
I think it's possible that Jacob actually thought that those dreams were confirming his favoritism.
You know, there's something there, that these dreams are confirming what Jacob had already decided.
Not
God,
really not how the boys would react.
not at all how
That
the
for
brothers
sure,
would
yeah.
react. But if all of a sudden Jacob's thinking, yeah, you know, maybe I was right to go ahead and make Joseph the head of the clan. See, look, God's confirming this. We did the right thing. You know, well, but notice, now the brothers aren't just angry at him, now they're jealous. Anger and jealousy is a nasty brew, isn't it? Of course, we know the story, right? But so let's keep going. 12 through the first part of 14. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. So I don't know, this is probably a waste of time, but I drew a map. Because I realized, I keep telling you to just kind of picture it in your head, but right down here is Ur. This is where Abraham started out. Abraham and Terah and the whole family, they meandered up the river. This is Haran. This is where they settled and where his brother Haran passed away. This is where Laban's family is, where Rachel was found. This is the area up here. Notice this is Nineveh over here. Just, we're not there yet. It probably actually doesn't even exist yet at this point, but you kind of get the picture. Baghdad is about right here, just for reference. And so Haran up here is where their family is. Down here is Shechem. There's Jerusalem and Beersheba. All of Israel is right there. And just for the sake, last week we talked about Edom, which is Esau's family. They're down here in this area. Moab and Ammon are the two descendants of Lot. That's where their families end up lining up. But you kind of get a picture of where we're at, right? So Beersheba down here is kind of where Isaac wanted to live, remember? That's where Abraham was living. Shechem up here, that's where he's sending the family. Hebron becomes Jerusalem. The area around Hebron is what becomes Jerusalem. So you're talking probably about a 60 to 70 mile journey or so, give or take. Does that make sense? But notice, Jacob is sending Joseph to check on the boys. Joseph has already given one bad report. So, do you think,
I wouldn't send a servant.
why wouldn't he send a servant? Well, I think part of it is Jacob is sending Joseph because Joseph needs to learn how to be the leader. He needs to learn the business, and he needs to make sure that his shepherds, the people who are caring for his flock, are doing their job. So on one level, there's a very pragmatic reason. Jacob wants his son to know the business. It's got to happen. On the other hand, it seems to imply that Jacob doesn't trust his boys to do the job right.
Maybe because of the reports he's got.
Maybe because of the reports he's already gotten. Maybe because the boys, like I said, once dad makes Joseph the head of the family, they're starting to slack off some. We don't know why, but we're starting to get a picture of it's probably a justifiable reason to send Joseph up there.
I think he's probably just getting obnoxious and he's like, just go. You're being obnoxious.
So it could be that too. It could be that Jacob's just like, look, kid, just go. Go figure out how the sheep are doing and come back and tell me. And you know what? They're about 50 miles away. So we're talking a couple of days journey and a couple of days back. I'll get 4 days of peace and quiet. Maybe all of the above, right? I mean, again, we're speculating here, but I want you to see that this could easily be something that happens today. We can all picture this, can't you? Maybe if you've got siblings, you can even figure out which sibling is who, right? We're all the responsible ones, right? Of course, I'm not for sure which brother is responsible right now. I don't know. Maybe it'll tell us, right? Benjamin? He's not even old enough to do anything. He's like 12, you know?
Let me surprise us.
Maybe. We'll give Benjamin the benefit of the doubt. All right. Next paragraph. Melissa, you watching the chat? Make sure okay. So he came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance. Before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of the hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it. So first of all, so we have them around Beersheba, or around Jerusalem. They go up to Shechem, right? That's where they're supposed to be pasturing the flock. Are they pasturing the flock where they're supposed to be?
No.
Just so you know, Dothan is over here. So he goes 2 days, 2.5 days journey up here, has to go 2.5 days journey over here. For all intents and purposes, does this look good for the brothers?
No, but it doesn't make Joseph look very good when he's wandering in the field.
It makes Joseph look like a bumbling fool, doesn't it? That he's just wandering the field. Where is the flock at? I can't see any sheep.
Did he ever do the shepherding himself?
Probably not.
So he doesn't know what he's doing at all.
Probably not. Now, why do you think the brothers would take the flock and not go where they're supposed to be?
More girls in the other area.
Girls with wine, one of the other.
Girls, wine,
Better grazing.
what?
Better grazing.
It doesn't say he took the flock. They took the flock to there, or they were there. I thought the sheep was back in the other place.
Why do you think they would go where their dad wouldn't find them?
They were tired of it all.
What?
They were tired of it all.
They were tired of it all. And let's think about this. What do we know about this family? What are they good at? Lying, stealing, cheating. There's probably a good chance that the brothers, once they realize that they're not going to get anything, like, well, let's just take the flocks and go our own way.
We were running away.
There is a notion that it's saying that because they went to Dothan instead of Shechem, they were planning to just not go back. Dad's got his favorite son, let him have the favorite son. He doesn't know what he's doing with the flocks anyway. we'll take the flocks and we'll just make our own life. Because let's face it, we're not the favored son anyway. We're not going to get it. Can you see that?
Hadn't been for that one guy found him out wandering, they might not have found him.
And if it hadn't been for that one guy who hadn't saw Joseph wandering in the field like a moron, wondered what in the world this boy with his vibrant coat's doing, he may have never found him. Now, by the same token though, so they've got this plan, right? Let's kill the boy. Let's tell dad it was a wild animal. I mean, my goodness, he was wandering in the fields. Who knows what would happen? He probably doesn't know how to defend himself. I mean, they're all sons of Jacob. You remember the tent boy, not the hunter. So who knows whether or not this Joseph has any ability to defend or protect him. It's probably a very plausible story, right? I mean, if he's the favored son and dad wasn't, originally wasn't a shepherd, he probably is sheltering him a little bit.
I find it interesting that Reuben, the oldest, is
Ah.
the one that kind of
So-
came to his rescue. Maybe.
So why would Reuben want to come to this
He would
usurper's aid?
get good favor in dad's eyes.
Yeah. So if Reuben stands up for dad's favorite child, and even though technically it should have been Reuben that received the double portion, if he's the one who thwarts their plan and he brings Joseph back miraculously, Reuben's stock rises pretty quick, doesn't it? But again, this stuff never happens today, does it? I mean, that's the thing. Reuben should have originally had it. So maybe now maybe he can't get everything, but now maybe Joseph gets 90% and Reuben gets 8% and all the rest of them get 2 or something.
Or maybe Joseph will make him second in command.
Maybe Joseph will make him second in command. I saved you, Joseph. I was there for you when the rest of them weren't. You owe me. Can't you hear this stuff?
So that's what the second part of verse 22 means. That he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to the father. So he meant Reuben.
Reuben, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Reuben is saying this because he's learned a thing or two from dad, and he's going to be his own conniving person. He still doesn't. There's nothing about this that says that he likes the boy, but if he doesn't have to like him in order to benefit from him, right?
Oh, you know what? I forgot that he had relations with one wife. And so maybe
Oh,
he
yeah.
restored some.
Minor detail.
So
Yeah.
minor detail. Let's go back a couple of chapters or a chapter or so. Remember when that incident where Reuben, who was the oldest son, decided to take one of his stepmoms and take her to the bedroom and have his way with her?
I missed that part.
Kaya, you missed that, huh?
No,
So,
it said, mine says initially, he would remind his brothers of it later. Initially, Reuben's attempts to influence his bets became successful, but after his arrogant incest with Bilhah, is that his name?
Bilhah, yeah.
His efforts were always ineffective after that.
So on the one hand, Reuben, who should have been it, messes up. And so dad chooses Joseph instead. So this is doubly Reuben trying to make things right with dad. I messed up once, but I can save his favorite son. So maybe I may not get restored all the way, but maybe I can get back in good graces with dad again. There's double reasons here why Reuben would do this.
But it seems very selfish on his part.
Oh, absolutely selfish.
Yeah.
It has not, probably has very little to do with out of the good of his heart. Would he keep his brothers from getting rid of that young loudmouth dreamer? Let's just be honest here.
But the other brothers must take some stock in his opinion.
And the other brothers at least have seen him enough of his, I mean, he's been the leader. You know, he has been the leader of these siblings for many years until dad finally said, nope, it's Joseph. So there's a sense in which while the other brothers outside of Reuben and Joseph and Benjamin are not very fond, at least they're following Reuben's lead a little bit, right? But again, this kind of stuff never happens today. We never pit brother against brother. We never, ever have family feuds where one side is favored and another is not. That stuff just doesn't happen, does it? There's not a favorite out of you two girls, is there?
No.
Right now, they're claiming they don't think so. Let's see where it goes. So we're back here at verse 25, right? So Joseph is in the pit, right? So they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. Now, who are Ishmaelites? These are cousins, right? But they're the cousins from the not so favorite side of the family. Probably don't get along very. Remember, there's that whole thing of Esau had 2 Hittite women and he thought he'd get in good with his mom by taking an Ishmaelite wife, and that really didn't go over very well, did it? So needless to say, the 2 sides don't get along. But here we have Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So just for clarification, the Ishmaelites are coming from up here and they're heading down to Egypt. And now let's switch back over here.
But they threw Midianites in there in that one.
They threw some Midianites in there as well.
Is that the same tribe?
Same kind of area. So
Okay.
it's a caravan of both Ishmaelites and Midianites, which both are not their family, is the point it's making. So where is Judah here? Judah's number 1, 2, 3, 4. Now forget the fact that Judah ultimately becomes the tribe where the kings come out. Forget that that's a reality. Where does Judah stand in all this? Judah's probably not getting much of anything. So when he sees the Ishmaelites come along, he sees an opportunity to get some money. Because let's face it, even if Reuben is the one in charge, is Judah getting anything really? So Judah's kind of looking out for himself. Let's make some money here. I mean, my goodness, let's not harm the boy. He is our flesh. He is our brother. You know, that's probably taking it too far, guys. But we can sell him off and we can all get rich on the endeavor, right?
Apparently Reuben isn't there at the time either.
What's that?
Apparently Reuben isn't there at the time they're doing this.
Apparently Reuben's not there because Reuben isn't standing up, at least not yet, right? And what did you say?
Is that very much money?
Well, here's the thing. In about 500 years, when the Torah is written down, when we get the 10 Commandments and the laws of God, they would say that 30 pieces of silver is the price for a slave. Yeah, ouch. They're not even getting 30 pieces for Joseph. They're like, look, he's scrawny. He doesn't know how to work. Give us 20 pieces and that'd be good enough.
Okay, so then what does this mean? And mine says to go with that in later times, this amount was the value of a male Joseph's age who had been dedicated to the Lord.
So what it's saying is, this isn't a working slave. This is like a house slave. He's a manservant. He's a pretty boy. He's not someone who's going to do the hard labor. He's, you know.
He's gonna open the tent flaps and bring you your tea.
Yeah. He's a cabana boy. He's not, you know, and to push the point just a little bit further, the fact that it says that if that is true, someone who is devoted to the gods meant that they were a pretty boy and were a nice piece. Someone who would be used for intimate interactions, not necessarily for work.
He was cool.
So he was the pool boy, I guess. Which again, this notion that he was the favored son and probably sheltered, that's kind of playing in here. It's not looking good for Joseph.
No calluses.
No calluses, you know, he's got very soft and delicate hands.
The Midianites were the ones that got him out of the pit.
The Midianites
They
did,
sold him to the Ishmaelites.
no, it was the brothers who sold him, but they had the Midianites pull him out of the pit, so they weren't the ones who got him out. We don't know what happened. The brothers arranged this trade between the Midianites and the Ishmaelites. You know, notice who gets their hands dirty. We're just the brothers. We had no clue what happened.
My translation says the brothers pull him out.
So, either way, but the point is pretty clear. The Midianites are outsiders. The Ishmaelites are not part of our family. We've got a bunch of people involved in this that shouldn't be involved. And realistically, they're not even getting a good price for the brother. And if anything, they might be selling him, for all intents and purposes, and I hate to say it, into the sex trade. But you know, they're not killing him, right? He's still alive. Yes.
All I can think of is the brother's like, hey, you got this cheap kid in this hole for you.
We're not even gonna charge you 30, but just 20.
He's in the hole.
He's in the hole, he's not gonna run. 10% off. We just want to get rid of the kid.
Kid in the hole.
Does this look good on the brothers at all?
Not yet.
Nothing about this looks good, does it? So, they've taken him down to Egypt. Now you remember who Egypt is, right? Egypt is the dreaded family. This is the house of Ham. This is the least favorite. At least you know the Ishmaelites are somewhat related to us, and the Midianites, they're kind of neutral, but they're going down to the enemy. It's not looking good for Joseph. Any other thoughts before we read the next paragraph? Anything on the chat I need to deal with yet? Okay. 29 through, looks like the end of the chapter. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where can I turn?" Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They had the long robe with sleeves taken to their father, and they said, "This we have found. See now whether it is your son's robe or not." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. A wild animal has devoured him." Joseph is without a doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put on sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father bewailed him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So Reuben's plan to garner some good favor with dad is shot. Joseph is sold in Egypt with the enemy.
How far is that truck?
You're talking at least probably 200 miles. If they go all the way to Memphis, which is the capital at this point in time, it's probably a good 200-mile journey. And he's not going to get to ride on the camels like everybody else. He's probably going to walk. And he's probably going to be tied at the rope, and it's probably not going to be pretty. So, you know, the pretty boy may at least will have calloused feet when this is all said and done.
That's a long time to think.
That's a long journey to think. We're talking at least a good week's journey, if not maybe a little longer. And then to see Dad's response. You ever seen somebody who's lost someone and it just doesn't look like they're ever going to come out of it? That's the picture that's being painted here. And that probably strikes a little home.
This is a hard part to read.
You've been there. You know what that's like. And of course, the reality is the brothers and his daughters actually begin to feel remorse. They try to comfort Dad, and it's just no good. Got something?
I was thinking Reuben's reaction to finding him out of the pit. That he kind of knew what was, I mean, was he acting?
That's what I was thinking too. They
I
know
mean,
he's
he
not
knew,
dead.
was he out for negotiating the price and they took him out of the pit before he got ready to say goodbye?
It paints the picture that Judah's the one who went and negotiated the price. And Reuben may have actually been intending to go get Joseph. I mean, that's what it says. So he wasn't there when Joseph was sold into slavery. And so whenever he goes to save his brother, he comes to an empty pit. And so to a certain degree, the brothers are also deceiving Reuben.
Because when he tears his coat,
That's a sign of great mourning and remorse. Now, he might be mourning the fact that his brother is gone. He could also be mourning the fact that his plan of getting in good standing with Dad is gone. And it might be a little bit of both. But the reality is Reuben's lot doesn't get any better with his brother disappearing.
So do you think he knew that they were selling him, or do you think he was just, they threw him in there just to teach him a lesson?
I think Reuben thought they were throwing him in there to teach him a lesson, and Reuben thought he'd pull him out and everything would be okay, and maybe the boy would learn to just keep his dreams to himself. But again, Judah's got nothing to benefit one way or the other, so Judah takes advantage of this opportunity where we've got Midianites and Ishmaelites coming through trading, and all of a sudden he can get some money in his own pocket. And so I think Reuben wasn't there when Joseph was sold into slavery. And now I think Reuben realizes, oh crap. We thought we were just throwing him into the pit to learn a lesson, and now he's gone.
It doesn't say in place that they told Reuben what really happened.
It doesn't say that they told him at all.
Family tradition, they deceived their brother.
Yeah, you know, there's that whole family tradition of deceiving family, right? You know, it just keeps going on.
So if they never told Reuben what was going on and they knew he knew Joseph was gone, he could have thinking that Joseph went back to Dad and now they're all
It could be that.
packed up and out.
It could be that Joseph has gone back to Dad. At some point, the brothers would have had to tell Reuben, hey, he's gone. But they don't have to tell him that they sold him. And so they concoct this plan. Let's take a goat. I mean, and let's get the blood, because they've got goats everywhere, right? They're shepherds.
Well, and we don't know, they may have already done that before Reuben actually came back.
And they could have done that before Reuben came back. That you're absolutely right. In fact, if I was Judah and I was concocting this plan, I'd make sure the blood-soaked coat was down in the pit when Reuben goes to go save him. Because then all the bases are covered. Clean and everything's good, right?
No
Except
bones.
there's no more animal, there's no more Joseph, just the coat.
No bones, no animal, no Joseph. Well, it's
That's-
clean enough, clean
That doesn't
enough.
fly with NCIS thing.
And no, NCIS thinking when Well, it's a good thing NCIS doesn't come around for another 5,000 years, so we're okay, right? Or, well, at least 4,000 years.
No DNA testing.
No DNA testing.
I guess in that case, Reuben's demeanor was true. He was genuinely mourning his brother.
It seems to me that Reuben has a genuine mourning reaction. And to be honest with you, that would be better for the other boys anyway, wouldn't it? Because
Dad's gonna listen to Reuben, he's the oldest, he's been trying to be the head of the family all these years.
even though he's lost standing, at least Dad would probably listen to Reuben on this fact.
And the brothers don't have to share the pieces of silver either.
And that's one less person to divide the 20 pieces of silver amongst. So now we're down to dividing 20 by 9 instead of 10. We know the end of the story and we'll get to it, but does this feel good at all? In fact, doesn't this kind of feel like a new low for the family? I mean, yeah, Dad stole the birthright from Uncle Esau, but I mean, he didn't get Esau sold into slavery.
It's like a soap opera.
It's absolutely like a soap opera. Soap opera's got nothing on scripture.
Instead of just, James, you know, he had to run for his life, he didn't get to stay home.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything about God in this story yet? Not yet. Maybe those dreams? Maybe. Again, maybe it was just some bad mutton from the night before. I don't know.
Maybe
But
the timing of the caravan.
the timing of the caravan, it's just, you know, that's the thing. If we jump too quickly to what we know happens, we fail to see just how bad this is. And of course, they knew where those Ishmaelites were going to trade. They're going down to Egypt, so they know what they're sending Joseph to. The Ishmaelites aren't going to want to keep a slave. They're going to want to trade their stuff, sell everything off, come back with other goods that they can trade, go back and forth. They don't want extra mouths to feed. So they know where they're sending Joseph to.
This kind of, that takes me back to the statement you keep making each week on, that we're given choices, and then God has to take those choices and go, okay, I can accept that and work with it from there. That's what this reminds me of.
So yeah, the other side of that is absolutely that. God still says in the midst of this disgustingness, God says, I can work with it. I will bring good out of this if they'll let me. And to a certain degree, God brings good out of it even though they don't let him. To be honest with you, Judah could care less whether or not Joseph lives or dies. In fact, if he dies, it's far better for him. Because now we've gone all the way. We're going all in on this. And so, again, anybody else, their life get this bad? But if your wife hasn't gotten this bad, then do you have any reason to believe that God can't make good out of what you've got? Just saying. Any other thoughts? Got a half an hour. Do you want to read the next story? So let's shift gears. It happened at the time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near the city, a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. There, Judah saw the daughters of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Again, she conceived and bore a son, whom he named Onan. Yet again, she bore a son, and she named him Shelah. She was in Chezib when she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn son, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Why not? Then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother. But since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's wife, so that he would not give her offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Does anything good, is Judah's character getting any better?
I think it's funny, he's the only one mentioning right now that he's left with the home place.
So by this point, we don't know exactly how many years it is between the end of 37 and the beginning of 38, but it's clear that Judah is old enough. He's made some kind of a name for himself. And these sons might have already been born when the events of 37 happened, but the reality is we don't know exactly what's going on, but these boys are old enough that they're old enough to be married themselves. It could be that Judah has kids older than his brother Joseph. Very easily could happen.
Well, Tamar was really Judah's daughter-in-law.
Tamar was Judah's daughter.
It said
Yep.
with her father, but that's,
We're not there yet.
that's her father.
Right. So on the one hand, we have to understand the reality is when a woman got wed, her livelihood was tied to having sons, right? We've talked about this in the past. So while it seems really odd, and I definitely wouldn't want to have to deal with it, and I'm glad that my brother has kids of his own. The reality is it was a way of caring for this woman who had left her family. She's technically no longer tied to her family. She is Judah's responsibility. And when Judah's son dies, this widow would be his responsibility to care for the rest of his life. So part of what they did was to make sure that that was not to be the case. You'd give an heir to this woman who would ultimately be the oldest son's child. And that way she would have a son who could ultimately eventually take care of her. It's a little weird for us today, but in some ways you can see the grace in it.
It's kind of the opposite of the maidservant's kids being the wife's kids.
Right. It's kind of the exact opposite, but it's in that same line. By extension, they become, if we flip this back over, when Rachel couldn't have kids, Bilhah had kids on her behalf. And so for all intents and purposes, Dan and Naphtali, while they were Bilhah's kids, they were also Rachel's kids. And that's kind of what you see going on here. It's a different way of approaching it, but it's the same kind of concept. Does that make sense? So Judah's got 3 boys. We don't know if he's got a favorite son. Maybe he learned that lesson from dad. But the first boy,
Since there's only one left, he's got a favorite.
well, now he's definitely got a favorite because there's only one left. But the first one was evil in God's sight. Anybody surprised that Judah's son would be evil in God's sight? I mean, let's be a little honest here. Does Judah give us any reason to think he's gonna raise good kids?
I think I'm bothered by the fact that it said, so the Lord put him to death, where there's been all kinds of evil up before this.
Yeah,
and
how
they-
evil is this
they-
kid?
They've snuck through.
How much
this-
worse could this be than
Yes.
what they already seen?
And I think that's a point that's trying to be made. Let's just be honest. Judah right now is the most despicable of all of Jacob's sons. And if Judah is this despicable, it's showing his kids aren't any better. And now, how bad are they? I don't know, but they got to be pretty bad for God to say, you know what? No.
But do you see how people would interpret that as like people that get an illness and God forbid, and people are angry with God, thinking that he caused that? Do you see how that can be read
So
into that?
this is a good point to make this point. We need to understand something. The Hebrew here, we tend to translate it, and God caused this to happen. That's how, it's not technically incorrect, but it's not the best choice of how to translate this. We're going to see this when we get there. I'm hoping we get into Exodus, because what it says is God hardens Pharaoh's heart. When more appropriately here and there, it should read, and God allowed Pharaoh's heart to be hardened. God stopped trying to soften Pharaoh's heart and just let him go where he wanted to go. I think in this instance, God sees a kid who's not good, who's not doing good things. He's probably reckless. He's probably putting himself in bad situations, and finally says, look, kid, if you're going to keep doing it, there's only so many times that I'm going to pull you off the cliff.
You're gonna go jump in the quarry.
If you're going to go jump in the quarry, and that's at some point, I just got to say, enough's enough. You didn't learn the lesson. You're going to face the consequences of your actions. And I see that more of what's happening here. I don't believe God ever intentionally causes things, but I think sometimes God says, okay, if you really want to do that, I'll take my hands off and I'll let you do that. And we'll just see how it goes for you. You get the difference? But to someone who says that God knows everything, if he knew that this was going to happen, then in essence, he's allowing it to happen. But allowing something to happen is not the same as causing it to happen. If this kid really is that evil, who knows how many enemies he's made? Who knows how many bad deals he's done? Who knows what he could bring on himself? The point is, he is unliked enough that God says, okay.
Could be where free will takes over again.
I think it's absolutely where free will has taken over. And not only that, but again, I think it points to the wickedness of Judah at this point. Judah is not a good guy. I mean, he was the one who spearheaded the selling of his brother. So would it make sense that if that's the kind of person he is, if he hasn't learned something, he's probably not going to have the greatest of kids either, is he? Right. I mean, we got that saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree for a reason. Now, there are people who buck that trend. We do know people who, but yeah.
So what's the story? Do we know anything about the guy that he went to live with when he found his wife? I mean, who's this guy?
So,
I'm curious, did dad send him off to teach him a lesson, or did he just?
he's went to live amongst the Canaanites. The Canaanites are not the Egyptians. Egyptians are here. Canaanites are right there. Canaanite, Hittites, same kind of people. These are not necessarily people that mom would be proud of. And Grandma Rebecca would definitely not be happy that Judah married somebody from the Canaanites. Do you get what I'm saying? If we still had that map that I drew with all the family names on it, this is a part of that not so good line. This is Ham's line again. These are the ones who were not good to great-great-great-great-grandpa Noah. And they've just continued down that track. So not only is he a part of the deceiving family of Terah, right? I mean, that's their modus operandi, but Judah has married a woman who's from these people who were not good people.
So they're his type of people.
So from all intents and purposes, yeah, they're his type of people. And so is it any surprise that their boy is not somebody that anybody really likes?
Not citizen of the year.
Definitely not going to get Citizen of the Year. And so then when the first son dies, the second son, so let's just be clear about this. The second son sees an opportunity. He can sleep with his sister-in-law, and technically he has done his duty. But if he makes sure that he doesn't actually get her pregnant, I guess God just doesn't want her to have kids. So that means now I'm the oldest and I get all the inheritance, right? Do you see?
So if he had a child with a woman, the child would be above him and.
Yes.
Exactly.
The child of this firstborn son would have been higher in stature than the brother Onan was.
Which is father.
Technically in DNA, but not by rank. So by having a child with Tamar, Onan would essentially be supplanting his ability to be head of the family. And so Onan's like, you know what? No, I think I'm going to keep this to myself. And so he pulls out a little early on purpose. And God, but again, let's remember, what's this family like? I mean, his brother was evil enough that God just let him die. So are we surprised that the second brother would not necessarily be the most scrupulous of people? And I mean, this is coming from the line, again, that sold their brother into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. And it's at this point that I want to remind us, this is the family that God chooses to bring King David out of. So when the second son dies, Judah's like, you know what? I'm not for sure I can let Tamar have my third son, because she might kill him too.
It's always the woman's fault.
It's always the woman's fault, right? And so, notice, just to show you the kind of person Judah is, Judah says, why don't you go back to your dad's house, and when my youngest son is finally old enough, I'll send for you. Can Tamar get married again? No. Do you think Judah has any intentions of sending his youngest son to give Tamar a child? No. No, it's pretty clear. Yes, sir.
Why doesn't he just send her off? Say, that's my problem.
That's just what he did. Go back to your dad. You're not my problem anymore. Your dad can care for you because I'm not going to. Because you're basically a black widow. Every time one of my boys gets with you, they die. And I'm sorry, you're more trouble than what you're worth. We thought the family couldn't get much worse, didn't we? So let's keep going. Verse 12 through 19. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to the sheep shearers, he and his friends, Haresh the Adumite. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat down at the entrance of Enamam, which is on the road to Timnah. She saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went over to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a kid from the flock. And she said, only if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what shall I pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and the staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and went away and and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. Think Tamar learned something from the family?
Yeah.
And he didn't recognize his voice.
She's a Canaanite, she knew that beforehand. Okay, well, maybe. But she definitely didn't get, she learned a thing or two with the family, but. Now, again, this doesn't make any sense to us, does it? This is not how our culture works. But the reality is, here's the thing. She has stayed faithful as a widow up until this point. She has watched that Sheila is now an adult and old enough to have fulfilled the duties of a family. And yet, Judah has not sent his son. So for all intents and purposes, does Judah have any intention of fulfilling his duties as her father-in-law?
So what's her motive of getting pregnant by Judah? Does that move her back into family ranks or what?
Well, bare minimum, it might give her a son who could put her back into society as someone who could be cared for. The other side of it is technically, if she does get pregnant by Judah, then that puts her back under Judah's care because it's Judah's son.
Goes back to the younger son, she can use her black widow powers in his first.
Okay, so Grant said that quiet enough. I'm going to say it loud, even though it's so if she gets pregnant by Judah, then now she's back in the family. And if she goes and sleeps with Sheila and he dies, well, then her son's the only heir of Judah, and she gets everything. He says black widow, doo-doo-doo-doo, powder. Yeah.
The giving of the son, of that last son to her that was not done. Was there a motive there of why he never did that?
I think he's decided to just write her off. He's decided,
Would
He
that
was
have
also
been
afraid that his
expected
son
in
would
that
die.
culture?
what?
He was also afraid.
He was
that-
afraid his
yeah,
son would
that's
die, but it would be expected that he would do this.
The culture would expect
The
that.
culture would expect it. And so Judah is not doing what he is socially and legally responsible to do.
Just because he's mad.
Mad and afraid. And probably a little selfish.
Who can determine what all their motives were for all the disobedience?
I mean, let's just be honest. We can throw out almost any motivation right here, and it probably is going to stick because, I mean, Judah's not the shining example. Let's just be honest.
And again, for the culture, that is the only way she would get another husband.
And
Just
that is the
within
only
family.
way, because realistically, she is still bound to the family, and therefore she is not allowed to marry anyone else.
Because there is another eligible.
Because there is another eligible son there, she is still bound to Judah's family. So it's not like today where you're divorced and now you can get remarried. For all intents and purposes, the courthouse would never give her a right to be married again until this was finalized.
Or even a widow and remarried.
Even a widow to be remarried. It's not, because she's technically a widow, but she's not a widow when there's someone else that could give her an heir.
So when you married into the family, you were married into the.
Yes, exactly. And that's where that comes from. You're not, in our culture today, we marry an individual. In their culture, you married the family. I mean, you left, if you're a woman,
So you better look at all the men before you get married this time.
you better make sure that your second and third options are pretty good ones. And realistically, you were no longer a part of your family when you married into a family. The whole notion that we have today where most women take the husband's name, that is a nod to this reality. You're not just taking your husband's name, you're taking your husband's family's name. You're taking the whole family's identity. And for all intents and purposes, at this point in time in history, you may never see your family again. because many of them were nomads. They moved around, and if you saw them again, it was happenstance.
10 camps,
What?
maybe 10 camps.
Yeah, 10 camps away, that you don't go back for Christmas and Easter,
So what happens to families that only bear girls?
So the families that only bear girls find themselves being dependent on who they marry into. Because now they're subject to their children's husbands. When the father finally passes away, if the mother's still living, she would be a tag along with her daughters. She would become a maidservant. So the reality of being mistaken for a temple prostitute is not necessarily something we see as righteous by any stretch of the imagination. But yet, to a certain degree, Tamar is only trying to get what's actually hers. She has been faithful. And realistically, she probably could have taken the veil off and said, okay, Judah, it's time to make right on what is mine. But before she gets a chance to do that, Judah, whose wife has passed away, sees an opportunity. Well, it's been a while since I've been with a lady. I guess might as well. She's good enough.
And how well does she know him?
Well, let's be
Oh,
honest.
see, you can't just send me a goat, because I.
She knows him. Okay, so you're going to send me a goat. All right. Well, I don't trust you to send the goat. So why don't you give me an assurance to make sure you're going to make this deal good? She knows the family. She knows how Judah is, and she's making sure that she gets what she
I
deserves.
know it says it's been a long time, but he didn't even recognize your voice.
It has been long enough that he doesn't even recognize her voice. He has, for all intents and purposes, he's forgotten that Tamar even exists. We got 7 minutes to finish the chapter, so I better read a little bit more.
I think it's kind of weird though that someone came to Tamar, tell him. Tell
So,
her that Judah-
She's been watching the family. It's clear she's watching and waiting for Judah to do the right thing, and he hasn't. And so here at verse 20, I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of the chapter just because we've only got 7 minutes left. I told you I'd try and keep it now in half. So 20 through the end of the chapter. When Judah sent to the kid by his friend, the Adulamite, to recover the pledge from the woman, he could not find her. He asked the townspeople, "Where is the temple prostitute who was at Enam by the wayside?" But they said, "No prostitute has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her. Moreover, the townspeople said, 'No prostitute has been here.'" Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, otherwise we will be laughed at. You see, I was sent this kid and you could not find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the whore. Moreover, she is pregnant and resulted as a result of whoredom." And Judah said, "Bring her out, let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "It was the owner of these who made me pregnant." And she said, "Take note, please, these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah acknowledged them and said, "She is more the right than I, since I did not give her my son Sheba." And he did not lie with her again. When the time of her delivery came, there were twins in her womb. While she was in labor, one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound on his hand a crimson thread, saying, "This one came out first." But then he drew back his hand, and the other came, and out came his brother. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore his name was Perez. Afterwards his brother came out with the crimson thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. Twins again. They run in the family a little bit, don't they? So
That's just a visual. I'm sorry, I'm still wrapping my head around it. hand coming out, coming back.
That is definitely a little bit of a visual, isn't it?
And out far enough that you could actually
Tie
tie
it.
something onto it, I mean.
And it kind of is reminiscent, remember, what's Jacob mean? Grasper? I mean, it's definitely a descendant of Jacob. One says, no, I'm the first one out. Make sure you acknowledge me first.
Cross the line first.
I crossed the line first. It doesn't matter that he come in completely first. I crossed the line first.
I got the ribbon to prove.
So when she becomes pregnant, Judah feels like his problem has been solved. She's played the role of a harlot, and now I can be completely rid of her.
She
Only
holds the trump in her hand.
except the fact that she's got the trump in her hand. And here's the thing. For the first time ever, Judah admits publicly that he's wrong. From this point forward, Judah has been publicly humiliated, and Judah gets sent on a different track.
You might say she got his goat.
He absolutely got his goat. But on top of that, she changed his path. From this point forward, we'll start to see a different side of Judah. It took him being publicly humiliated before he finally was willing to say, you know, maybe I haven't been on the right way. And again, this is not how I would assume that anybody should get someone on the right path. Let me just be very clear. I don't think God is sanctioning this as a way of making people realize that maybe they need to change their ways.
You don't do this in marriage counseling?
I hope that it doesn't come to an affair in order to get a marriage to be better. But God can make good even out of that.
But it's typical of human behavior that you sometimes have to get hit and several times before your course of
Yeah.
action changes.
Yeah, that's the reality. Judah needed to get hit, and had to be hit hard before he would finally realize that maybe he wasn't doing this right. And according to tradition, these two boys are very different from Judah's other sons.
So she's his wife now?
He never sleeps with her again, but he treats her as a wife from this point forward. He finally steps up and does what is right.
Financially, he takes care of it.
So financially, he does take care of her. Yep.
What happened to Sheila then, or whatever?
Well, Sheila's still there, but for all intents and purposes, these boys become his heirs because they were meant to be the children of his firstborn son.
So they're higher up. than
So
she
they are
is.
higher up than Sheila is.
I'm glad we have to do this.
I'm really glad we don't have to do this anymore. But by the same token, it shows how God is providing, even in the midst of some really weird and what we would even say wrong and disgusting circumstances. God is still saying, okay, I can work with that. That's really messed up, but okay, I can work with that. Okay, I realize you guys are going the wrong path, but I can still make good out of this. And yeah, this chapter feels like a diversion, but I think we need to see how far Judah falls, and we need to see him begin to turn around before we get to the rest of Joseph's story. And I think we'll see a different side of Judah moving forward. So this isn't really a detour. This is God doing everything he can to bring this family to be who he intended them to be.
You know, it's almost kind of funny because when they couldn't find her, give her the goat, he said, just let the staff go.
Yeah, he's just like,
Okay, I don't
it's
need
not
it."
that big of a deal. We'll figure it out.
And then it was like,
And then he, What's behind door number 3? Oh, crap.
So in other words, this taking that house item as they got this.
Yeah, in many ways, this time around, taking the household gods, the signet ring, the cord and the staff, she cashes in on it, where her mother-in-laws did not. And again, the point I want you to see over and over and over again is God will do anything he can to redeem us. It doesn't matter how far we fall if we're willing to turn around and admit that we're wrong. And Chris, there's your point. We see Judah changing. We see Judah admitting that he was wrong, and he relents, and he doesn't put her to death because he is now doing what's right. By the same token, we know that as messed up as this story is, this ultimately becomes the line that God brings his own son out. Yeah, what? Perez, I think, yeah, I think it's Perez, who's not the one with the cord, by the way. You know, that whole thing about the one who's supposed to be the first getting bypassed, God does that a lot. It just, if you haven't noticed.
But you say how bad you can get, and then he still brings you back, but what happened to the 2 boys that he let perish? What, I mean, I don't see how bad did they have to be, or they didn't?
So I know we're over, but
What kind of an impact that had on Sheila?
oh yeah, I think it probably had an impact on Sheila and the kind of person that he would become. But I also want to, I'll make this a real quick point, and I realize this is not going to be fast enough time to make this point fully. But it's at this point that we need to remember, and I'll just be honest, on Sunday morning, it kind of bothers me. We leave one line out of the Apostles' Creed.
He descended into hell.
He descended to the dead or descended into hell, depending on what tradition you're given. Our tradition says that when Christ died, in between his death and his resurrection, he went down and gave the good news even to people like Onan and gave them a second chance. That all of these evil people that died before Christ came, our faith says that even in that, because God said, I love you enough that you've been down here and I'll give you a chance. Now, we don't know how many of them took it, but they call it the harrowing of hell. Literally the emptying of hell, that God went down in Christ and said, he took the keys of hell and death, and he says, anyone who will put their faith and trust in me, even though you have been evil, even though you deserve something else, you get an opportunity to be set free. Now, the reality is we don't know who takes that. And let's just be honest, we've already seen a lot of people who probably didn't take it. There comes a point where you're stuck in your own evil to the point where nothing is, you're not willing to ever admit that you've done something wrong to get redeemed of. And, you know, this is one of those things where I think even if the world is 1 billion years old, there are some people you could give them 10 billion and it still wouldn't be enough time for them to admit that they were wrong and that they need redemption. But I like to think and I like to hope that some of this family finally realized we need to be better. We should have been better. And hopefully when Christ gave them the opportunity, they took it. Now, I don't believe in the whole purgatory thing, and I don't believe you can pray people out of purgatory. We live in a different era. But for those who never got an opportunity to hear of Christ, I take comfort in knowing that fact, that our faith says that God gave them a second chance. How many take it? I don't know. Will we get it? We had the opportunity to receive Christ here. So I highly doubt that we get that second chance. But that's why it's so important that we spread the good news. It's far better to be given the opportunity to say yes to God here and get to experience his blessings in the here and now than to hopefully wait for a second chance later. And I realize I didn't do that justice, but is that a good enough nugget to kind of leave with?
Yeah.
So with that, let's pray. Lord, I am so grateful to know that even when I mess up, Lord, that you can bring something good out of it. And Lord, when I encounter the evil of this world, when I encounter the horribleness of this life, Lord, it is a true comfort to know that you are still moving in the midst of that, and you're still seeking to make good out of it. And Lord, you will always draw us unto you. Lord, I truly pray that anyone and everyone might hear of your goodness, your love, and your mercy, and they might receive it. Lord, I pray that you keep us from having to go the paths of people like Judah and his brothers. Lord, that we could choose a better way, that we could follow you into a better life. But Lord, even in the midst of the evil of this world, I'm grateful to know that you are still making good out of it. So Lord, just fill us as we leave. And Lord, may we be a blessing to all those around us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Sam, I gotta tell you, this afternoon,